Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Before we begin, a few things, an introduction to this class. This class is called the Monday Night Initiative, or I think the Monday Night Intensive or something like that. So it's a class that we've started, alhamdulillah. Each of the classes are going to be 5-week sessions, so they're intensive sessions. So we're going to be covering the entire Seerah in 5 weeks, and this is the first class. This is presented by the IIOC Education Committee. I was told to say that. So keep that in mind, inshallah. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and their efforts. This is called the Monday Night Initiative. Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Prophet of Islam. We're talking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And another thing we need to note is, since this is a class on his life and everything that he's done, we're going to be using the name Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam many times. And it's an obligation on every single Muslim to say sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which means peace be upon him, every single time the name of the Prophet is mentioned. However, there is a rule, or the scholars have said that this only is a requirement once in a gathering. So you say it every single time. You can say it in your heart, for example. But if you're in a gathering or you're giving a lecture where you're going to be mentioning his name several times, it is sufficient to simply say it once in the beginning of each gathering, and then it does not have to be said. So if you notice me not saying it every single time, or you yourself are not saying it every single time, you'll understand the reasoning why, inshallah. Okay? Why are we studying this subject? This subject is called the Seerah. Okay, the Seerah. Sin, Ya, Ra, Ta, Marbuta. The reason why it's called the Seerah, Seerah basically nowadays it means the biography of any person. It can be anybody. But when we say the Seerah, we generally mean the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, so why are we studying this subject? Number one, the most important thing is to contextualize Islam. To contextualize the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And we know that the two most important sources in Islam is the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And if you want to put them in context, you want to put them in their proper place, you have to be able to understand what they mean. So if you see somebody studying the Qur'an, and they have no understanding of the history of Islam, they have no understanding of the life of the Prophet, then you cannot say that they really properly understood the Qur'an, because they don't know what is the context behind those verses, unless they studied the Seerah within the tafsir as well. The same thing with the Sunnah. Two things we're going to be focusing on. One of them is chronological order. So the difference between different various random reports and what's known as Sunnah or Hadith is that it's not put in chronological order. If you look at the books by Imam Bukhari, by Imam Muslim, by all the other scholars out there, none of them put the books, they don't put the life of the Prophet into chronological order. So one of the things that the Seerah does is it does that in particular. The note cards are here. So one of the things that the Seerah does in particular is it does precisely that. And what does that allow you to do? It allows you to put every single thing into context. So you know what happened at this point in time, what was the next thing that happened. So now you have a context for everything in Islam. Why is this so important? Right now as Muslims, we're being attacked day in and day out. From the left, from the right, from the back, from the front, every single direction we're being attacked. And the reason why we're not able to understand Islam, or even defend ourselves, or even explain to people what Islam really means, is particularly because of our lack of context. And it's not only us, but why do people who even may have good intentions, why do they misrepresent Islam? Because they have no context. So when you look at, for example, about verses that talk about violence in Islam, that talk about verses that are violent in the Qur'an, and people say, well, why are there violent verses? Well, you have to ask again, what is the context? And one of the ways you'll be able to figure out what the context is by knowing exactly what the history was, what led up to those events, in what context, in what situation were those verses actually revealed. If you find the Prophet ﷺ doing one certain action in the Sunnah, or if you read a hadith, for example, it may just be that you read the literal words of the hadith, but at the same time you did not understand the context of that hadith. Why? Because you don't have the historical background behind it. Why? Because maybe the person who compiled the hadith did not give you the background in his commentary, and he assumed maybe that you would already know. But many people do not know, so it's very important. The second thing here is the details surrounding each event. So to know why each and every single thing happened is very important. So for example, if you were to go and you were to open a book on Seerah, on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, by a Orientalist, what's known as a European scholar of Islam, you will find that if you look at certain battles, you look at the Battle of Badr, for example, you will find that their perspective varies greatly from the perspective that a Muslim scholar would give, or a Muslim scholar who does his research properly would give. Why? Because if you take only some instances surrounding that event, you will think that it was initiated by one group. But if you take all of the circumstances surrounding that event, you will realize the actual context and who initiated it, who's at fault, who's to blame, who was the offensive team, who was the defensive team. But if you don't have the details surrounding the event, you may think that one team was the defensive and the other team was the offensive, when in actuality it was the other way around. So it's about perspective, and the only way you're going to get the correct perspective is by having all the details. It's very easy to change perspective and say that the Native Americans were the terrorists and the Americans were the freedom fighters. And if you have all the details, maybe it could be flipped. So it could be this way or it could be that way, based upon how many details you have regarding each event. So this is the first and most important thing why we study the life of the Prophet Muhammad. The second thing, the second reason is to know him. To know who he is. If you don't know who he is, if you don't study his life, how can you possibly know who he is? Every single Muslim across the board, almost every single one, claims to love the Messenger of Allah. Almost every single one claims to love the Messenger. And people, when they sing a song, sometimes they're so emotionally attached, they're so influenced by him. But if you ask them, what do you actually know about the life of the Prophet? They cannot even tell you much. And you say, well, what is that knowledge based upon? What would happen if someone came and gave you a few incidents here, a few incidents there? Now you'd become confused. And now your iman, your belief is shaky. Why? Because your lack of knowledge. So it's very important to know who the Prophet is, to know about his life, to know about the history of Islam, all of these things. And number three, why is it important to know him? Not only to love him, but to have an evidence of his prophethood. How can you know that he's a true prophet if you have no knowledge about his history? And every single time you learn more and more about his history, you learn more and more about what he came for, what he preached, how he taught that, what were the successive stages of preaching, it will give you more evidence in the fact that he is a true messenger from Allah. So keep these 3 points in mind, inshallah. The methodology that we're going to use in order to go through this, one, we will use chronological order. So we will, for the most part, go in chronological order. Sometimes, if there's a few events that are kind of coupled together, for example, let's say that there's a persecution taking place against some of the Muslims. Maybe it happens over a period of 2 years or 3 years. Sometimes we'll couple all of those things together under the subject heading of examples of persecution by believers. Even though they didn't happen all exactly at the same time, we'll just put them in one, category just to make it easier for people to comprehend. The second thing is we're only going to limit ourselves to the most important events. So we're not going to go through each and every single detailed conversation that took place. We're not going to go to each and every single, the day that this happened, and the month that this happened, and all of these things. We're going to try and focus only on the important events. Why? Because we don't have time to get through each and every single detailed event. Okay, the third thing is, skip minute details, okay? When I said important events, what I mean is the most important events you'll find in the Seerah are those which are directly mentioned in the Qur'an. So talking about the Battle of Badr and Uhud and persecution and the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and all of these type of things, you will find them directly in the Qur'an because they're the most important events that took place. So we're going to focus on those rather than focusing on some of the small events. And the major events are very important because they were narrated by a large number of people, as well as the fact that they're in the Qur'an. Whereas the minor events, you may find someone giving, for example, in a lecture, certain event that took place in the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, you will find something different. You will find some small account or something like that. Our goal is not to get into those things because we want to get a nice overview. This is kind of like a zoomed out view of the entire 23-year mission of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The lessons behind the events. So one of the things we're going to try to do for the most part is mention the lesson behind each event. So not just simply analyze the event itself, but mention why it's important. There's some times where I will not go into the details about the lesson, because sometimes you can almost apply this to your daily life. And this is what I want you to do with the class. This is the whole point of the class. Apply this to your daily life and think, how can this scenario which took place in the past apply to my life today? What is it that the Muslims went through at this time and this stage in history that we're going through today? How did they react? How did their opposition react? What tactics did the Muslims use? What tactics did the non-Muslims use? And how can we relate that to our everyday experience here? So keep these things in mind as well. Sources. So the sources that we're going to be using, for the most part, first is going to be from the Qur'an. And if you look at the Qur'an, you could say almost half the Qur'an has to have the seerah, or the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there in the things that we're going to be talking about, in order to have it properly contextualized. If you don't have those things, you will be at odds to figure out, well, what is this talking about? It's talking about some kind of battle. Or what is this talking about? It's talking about some kind of persecution. What's this talking about? It's talking about some kind of treaty. So some people, they think they don't need to know any of these things. They say, let's just focus on Qur'an and Hadith. That's all we need to know. But if you can't put that into context, you can't understand a large number of verses and a large number of Hadith as well. The second is Hadith literature, which is obvious. The third are two very famous books, which are the oldest remaining surviving books. They're not the first books ever written, but they're the oldest surviving books that we have, which have actually given a chronological, detailed order about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. That is Ibn Hisham and Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq is the first book, the first author to actually write, or not the first author to write, but his book is the oldest remnant book that we have today in our possession. And one of the scholars known as Ibn Hisham took Ibn Ishaq's book and he summarized it. So if you ever find people quoting from Ibn Ishaq or from Ibn Hisham, you'll understand why. Because you will find certain books talking about the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, and they'll say based upon the earliest sources, for example. So it's important for you to know that the earliest sources they're talking about are these three actually. Ibn Hisham, Ibn Ishaq, and Ibn Sa'd, the Tabaqat. It's another third source which came a little bit later on. These three are the primary sources that are used when you're talking about the earliest sources. But there's a catch, and you need to be very careful. Just because you find a biography that says according to the earliest sources, doesn't mean that's according to the most authentic sources. So there's a difference between early source and authentic source. And that's a confusion sometimes. People sometimes assume that the oldest one must be the most authentic one. But that's not necessarily true when it comes to the Islamic sources. So keep that in mind, inshallah. We won't get into too many details there. If we find a contradiction between Ibn Ishaq and the Qur'an, or we find a contradiction between Ibn Ishaq and something in Hadith, for example, something in Bukhari might be contradicting something that is in Ibn Ishaq, and it happens. Which one should we give preference to? The ironic thing is sometimes you found many Muslim scholars giving preference to Ibn Ishaq for certain reasons that they had. What we'll try to do, inshallah, is give preference to the Hadith, which is authentic, if it is authentic, inshallah. The age of ignorance. Okay, so this is getting into the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before we begin this, let us make a dua. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana. O Allah, teach us that which will benefit us, and allow us to benefit from that which you've already taught us. Allahumma inna na'udhu bika min 'ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yakhsha. O Allah, we seek refuge in you from knowledge which does not benefit, and from a heart which is not humble. Amen. The age of ignorance. The age of ignorance, what is called in Arabic al-Jahiliyyah. This is the description of the time before Islam, before the advent of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's called the age of ignorance not only in Arabia, but it's actually termed the age of ignorance in the entire world. So you can sometimes use this term particularly to refer to Arabia, but it can also refer to the entire world. So let us look at what historians have to say, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, about the situation of the world before the advent of the Prophet. First of all, there has been no prophet after Prophet Isa alayhi salam. There was no prophet after Prophet Jesus. And what had happened at this time in the centuries that we're talking about now, which is the 6th century CE, Common Era, you do not have any prophets coming after Prophet Jesus, and the revelations had almost all become corrupted. Very rarely could you find the message of any true prophet that was sent by Allah actually maintained its actual form. So what happened here was, you find, for example, in Judaism. Judaism's message had become corrupted as well, according to the Jews themselves, according to the Christians themselves, according to the Jewish encyclopedia even. And the two things that you find is, one, you find many corruptions, for example, sometimes taking Ezra as being the son of God. You find the concept of racial snobbery, that we are the chosen people, and therefore we are guaranteed some type of special privilege or special status. You find Christianity limited itself only to beliefs, and not anything with regards to action. So the belief that if we simply believe, then we're going to be saved, and the other part is nice, but it's not that essential. You find many other things, but I'm summarizing all of these things here. You find Magianism, which is a religion of fire worship, existing in Arabia. By the way, you find Judaism existing in Arabia. You find Christianity also in Arabia, particularly in the northern parts, which is in Syria, because the Roman Empire was there, which we'll talk about. Magianism also existed in some small tribes of Arabia. You would find it particularly in the Persian Empire. You have fire worship. And in fire worship, you simply go into the temple, you worship the fire, and that's it. When you go outside, you live your life like a normal person. So you have no code of life, you have no moral system, you have no particular way in which you're told that you have to live your life in this way. So outside it was all anarchy. Spiritual and moral anarchy, but inside you simply pay a few rites to the fire or to some other forces of nature that they worship, and that's sufficient for you. You have Buddhism, which originally did not even have the concept of belief in God, nor did it have the concept of idols. But in fact, Buddhism became so idolatrous that you find statues and idols of Buddha being spread out over every single part of India, of China, all other places that it spread. Buddhism was rampant in India at this time, and India was considered to be one of the major world powers here. The only idolatry that could actually match Buddhism was Hinduism. And in Hinduism, you had millions of gods, literally millions of gods. Okay, so they worshipped every single thing which they felt could do some type of benefit or harm. So if water can harm you, it can benefit you, oh, you must worship it as well. It has some ability. And you find something known as the caste system. And the caste system separated people into different categories and groups. There were the untouchables, and then there were the people who were at the lowest status, and then the highest status. So people basically became slaves based upon their religious system that they had at that time. So this is the situation you find here. In the rest of the world. In Arabia, you have idolatry, you have corrupted Abrahamic rituals. So what you have is that the Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, was actually there in Arabia at that time. He's the one who built the Kaaba, which we'll talk about. But what happened was the religion of that Prophet had become so corrupted that you could almost not tell that anything remained from this religion. So what do you find left? The only thing you find is a few corrupted rituals. So for example, the pilgrimage that was instituted by Prophet Ibrahim, by Prophet Abraham, was also there, but it was so corrupted that it was going around idols that were based inside the Kaaba. You find, for example, certain sacrifices that were taking place at that time. The sacrifices had changed from sacrificing for the sake of Allah to sacrificing for these idols. You find drinking, gambling, you find burying children alive was a very famous or common feature among the people. Why would they bury their children alive? Because they felt that they would be in poverty. Very much like is what's taking place today in many countries in the world, like India and in China in particular. They're having abortions because they feel that they cannot take care of these kids, and they do not want to have the kids, particularly if they were females. So if a female was born and said, well, a female is not going to be able to work as much, and is not going to have much status in society, so we might as well bury her alive. So that's what they used to do. Tribal wars would take place on such a level that some stupid small little incident or some small little argument that some people would have, they would get into a tribal war sometimes for 20 years, sometimes up to 40 years. A war between two tribes or many tribes being fought over the smallest, most insignificant, petty little quarrel that they may have had. But at the same time, you do find some characteristics which were very honorable among the Arabs. And among the honorable characteristics that they had was courage, you have honor, and you have the fact that they were very dedicated to a cause. So this is very important, because if you want to analyze why is it that Allah chose this group of people and not any of the other groups of people that He could have chosen. He could have chosen the quote-unquote civilized people of the Roman Empire. He could have chosen the quote-unquote civilized people of the Persian Empire. He could have chosen the thinkers and the rationalists of India, the philosophers of Greece, but He did not choose any of those people. He chose these people. What are some of the wisdoms behind that? Well, one, if you look at the three main characteristics that they have, Those are the characteristics that Islam would need to be able to spread throughout the world. You have to have courage. And what you find is people who live in such ostentation, who lived in such luxury and wealth and philosophy and high level of education, they kind of stick to their ivory towers. And they're not very courageous. So if they have a concept given to them, if they have some belief system that they have, they don't want to come out of that. They're not willing to go and put their life on the line for their beliefs. But when it comes to the Arabs, despite their tribal wars and their ignorance, they were people that if they believe something, if they believe you insulted my family, they will give everything to fight for that cause, to fight for that honor. And they became dedicated to that cause. And that's particularly what they needed. So you could say that they're like raw material. If you look at the other civilizations, if you look at the other empires that were out there, people were highly advanced in terms of technology. They were more advanced than the Arabs in knowledge. They were more advanced in many different fields and sciences and all of these things. But the one thing that they did not have, that the Arabs had, was dedication. They had that rawness that they could be shaped, they could be molded, and they could be sent out there to do something. It's not that they were easily convinced. Mind you, keep in mind, simple people are not simply easily convinced. They can be the most stubborn people of all. But when they are convinced, they would die for that belief. They would die for their beliefs. So keep that in mind. That's the age of ignorance. If you look at Arabia, this is kind of a zoomed out map, but let us look at Arabia. A few features you find. You find some empires. Here on the northwest side, you find the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire is an extension of the Roman Empire at that time. One of the major empires of the world, the Eastern Roman Empire, is called the Byzantine Empire. It occupied what's known as that time Syria, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and all the other countries, Eastern Europe that we have today. You find on the northeastern side, you find the Persian Empire, what's known as the Sassanid Empire. This empire, which is not too well known to the average Westerner, actually had a stronger army and was actually wealthier than the Roman Empire was. So they were actually better off than the Roman Empire, despite us not knowing as much about this empire. You also find India, being one of the other empires which is not listed on this map, as a very important power at this time. These are the three main powers, you could say, political superpowers of the time. What you find is Arabia is right in between all of those. And you find here as well the kingdom of Aksum, which is on the bottom, to the north, to the southwest. You find that they're also being controlled by the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. So you find Arabia kind of in the middle here. So what are some important facts about Arabia that we should know? One, it's 1.2 square million miles of desert. That's the type of environment that you have. So this entire, despite the fact that you see all of this land, it is mostly uninhabited. Huge land, but very, very few people actually living there, because that much desert is very difficult to find. You find very little water. So one of the things you found is that wherever you find water, people would settle there. And that's why if you look at the city of Mecca, the origin of the city of Mecca had to do with Prophet Abraham. When he settled there, you have the well of Zamzam coming up. And that's another story for another time. But you have the well of Zamzam there, and that's what caused people to go and settle in that area. And that's what made Mecca prosperous. So there's two types of people living in Arabia. The first type of people are what you can call civilized. And civilized means sedentary. Meaning that they've gone into a town or a city, made it into a town and city, and they're staying there. And they have to have a water source there. You may not have anything else, but you have to have a water source there. And the second type of category of people are Bedouins. And Bedouins are tribespeople who simply travel from one place to another. They're not sedentary. They're always on the move. And you're going to notice the difference between the people who come to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who are city dwellers, and the difference between the Bedouins, and how he reacted differently with the city dwellers as well as with the Bedouins. So keep that in mind, inshallah. So you find these two categories of people. The Bedouins are moving from one water source to another water source. When one of their water sources runs out, or if they just feel like moving, they would move to another region. Mostly unpopulated. Very hot and dry, very difficult climate to actually live in, and it's very mountainous. So if you take all of these characteristics here, all of this desert, a little bit of water, hot and dry, very mountainous, and you know mountains are difficult to cross. very difficult to live on top of it. You will find why these empires didn't care about Arabia. They were really not that interested in colonizing Arabia and taking it over because it didn't have much to offer. It didn't have many natural resources. It had gold and some of these other things, mines, but it didn't have that many things to offer. And even if it did, it's very difficult to maintain control of a region which is so difficult to live in. And it's very difficult to maintain control of people who are so used to their freedom. Like most of the Bedouins who are simply moving from one place to another, the thing that they loved most was their freedom. There's no one more freedom-loving than the Bedouins. So no one could ever colonize them because they would never, bear to live under any group of people. They would simply just move away to another group. So this is the way that they were, and this is Arabia before the Prophet. Now if you look at Mecca, so like we said, Mecca was settled because of the Zamzam well, which came up during the time of Prophet Abraham. And you can read the story in detail regarding that. This is an approximate picture of what it might have looked like in the beginning during the time of Prophet Ibrahim. You find here, there's the Kaaba over there in the picture on the left, and you have another picture of the Kaaba over here. Now this is the original Kaaba. This is the way it was. So it was not as cubic as it is today. And we're not going to discuss that, reasons why, but you can ask me later on why. This is the way that it was, actually. And it had a door, and the door actually was on the floor level. It was not on the higher level like we see today. So many changes have taken place in the time of the Kaaba, and there was no roof as well. So this is most probably what it kind of looked like at that time. We'll go into it a little bit later on. Prophet Ibrahim, so we will talk about the story. So Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail, they went to the city of Mecca under the orders of Allah. Prophet Ibrahim had a dream that he was supposed to leave his wife and his child over there, Ismail over there. And what happened was they sent the Zamzam well. A well started coming up, and that well remained there for them to drink from. Prophet Ibrahim later on came there. He came back and he built the Kaaba with them. Tribes began to settle because of the Zamzam well, because of the water that was there. That's how you have the city of Mecca. This Kaaba, they built a house, this Kaaba, which is dedicated to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Okay, this is the background of Mecca. Okay, so shall we keep this in mind? Now we're getting into the background and the birth. Now what happened was, there's a tribe by the name of Quraysh. Okay, this tribe by the name of Quraysh is a descendant going generations and generations after Prophet Ismail. After Prophet Ishmael, you have a tribe that's called by the name of Quraysh that is in charge. Which means they're in charge of Mecca, and they're in charge of the pilgrimage, and they're in charge of this building, the Kaaba. So that means that up until a little bit before the Quraysh, okay, all of those generations that were going on, those generations still maintain the sanctity and the dignity of the city of Mecca as well as the Kaaba. Even though you may not find too much about it in history, there was a few people, few tribes there, and they maintained that what's called the Tawheed, the monotheism, the worship of one Allah. This is the history. So later on what happened was, the Quraysh, which is just a few generations before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Quraysh took charge of the Mecca and the pilgrimage. And we're going to skip all the detailed history before that, which you can find in other books, because it's not directly relevant to the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. One of the important incidents that took place is the elephant incident. The elephant incident is narrated in a chapter of the Quran, which is known as Surah Al-Fil. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. This incident is very important, and it was something that took place right before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. And why it's so important, not only because it's mentioned in the Quran, it was something that was very important to the Arabs at the time, as well as to the Quraysh in particular. Keep in mind, the tribe of the Quraysh is in control of the city of Mecca. So while they're in control of the city of Mecca, there have been other tribes who would like to have taken control of Mecca as well. Why is Mecca so important? It's important because it has the Kaaba and because it has the well of Zamzam. So what happened was that all of the surrounding tribes were actually making the pilgrimage to the Kaaba from all the other parts of Arabia. So Mecca kind of became the capital of Arabia, you could say. Whether it's Bedouins or whether it's other city dwellers, they would all come to go and make the pilgrimage. And all of the pilgrimage was in the hands of the Quraysh. Now there are obviously other tribes who were interested in taking over control. The Quraysh were not always in power. In fact, the descendants of Ismail were actually once kicked out of power, and another tribe had actually come and taken over Mecca. But then the Quraysh had come later on, and they were able to kick them back out and regain control over the Kaaba and over Mecca. So what happened was, this very important incident took place. And the reason why it's important to know about this incident in the history of Arabia is, one, because it's mentioned in the Quran, and two, because it confirmed the authority of the Quraysh to be in power. And that was very important. So the incident in summary is this. A man by the name of Abraha, who was in charge of Yemen. Okay? Abraha was a Christian. And one of the things that he wanted was, he wanted to build a giant church, huge cathedral, by the name of Al-Qullays. And he built it. It was built from ivory and gold, and one of the most amazing things that they've ever seen in Arabia. Now, where is he getting all this money? He's getting all this money because he's a Christian, and there is Christianity spread in Yemen at this time. And all of the money is coming from the Roman Empire, because they were Christian at this time as well. So he was able to build this giant thing. And what he wanted to do was, he wanted to say that, you know what, this is the new place that everyone should come. Why are you going to go to Mecca, and why you want to go to the Kaaba? Let's get everyone to come to this nice, beautiful, giant church. So they tried to do that. And he built this giant, huge thing. And what happened was, he didn't realize is that the attachment of the people to the Kaaba, despite their idolatry at this time, the attachment of the people to the Kaaba was not like the attachment to anything else. Their attachment to the Kaaba was not because it was such a beautiful structure. It was not something really amazing at all. Anyone's house could have been built that big. But the attachment was something else. So one of the Bedouins, who was really upset, and he realized what Abraha was doing, he went inside the church, he defecated, and he took his feces and he smeared it over the walls of the church, and he escaped. And when Abraha found out that, you know what, one of the Arabs, obviously counting them all together, said they had come to, they come to defame this church, he got very upset. And he said, that's it, you guys are going to, I'm going to destroy your Kaaba now. That's what I'm going to do. So he took an army. An army, they say, about in the tens of thousands. Some say 30,000, some say 60,000. He took a giant army, and this army was headed by one huge elephant. And they may have had other elephants as well. And the elephant's name was Mahmud. No offense to anybody named Mahmud. But the elephant's name was Mahmud. And it was this huge elephant. And an elephant is a very big thing at this time, because an elephant, is very hard to stop an elephant. Imagine an elephant that's full of armor. Okay? And you have primitive weapons. Very difficult to stop him without a catapult. So they sent this army, and they went all the way to Mecca. While they were on their way to Mecca, a bunch of birds came. And the birds had in their beaks and in their claws stones. And these stones fell down, and it destroyed the entire army. And this is something that's not only in the Quran, it's something that the Arabs actually kept in their history. So when their army was defeated, they looked at this as a sign. And this is a sign that our city is holy, that Allah helped protect us, even though they were idol worshippers. They said, Allah helped protect this city, helped protect this house, and the Quraysh have a rightful, legitimate authority over this place. So it gave the Quraysh a very important status. They became at such a status that no one would mess with them, and no one would challenge their authority in the city. And it's very important. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ came from the tribe of Quraysh. Now, within the Quraysh, you have different families, different what are called clans. A clan is like a sub-tribe within the tribe. So you have different families. The most prominent and most important of those families was the Hashemites, belonging to a man by the name of Hashim. Okay? The next thing you find is the most prominent man or the leader among the Hashemites came to be known as Abdul Muttalib. And Abdul Muttalib was the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad. So why it's important? Abdul Muttalib was actually in charge of Mecca, and he was in charge of the Kaaba. Just to give you a background of where the Prophet's lineage is coming from. Abdul Muttalib had many children. Among his children, his most favorite child was Abdullah. And Abdullah is the father of the Prophet Muhammad. He married Amina, and Abdullah and Amina gave birth to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the year 570 or 571 CE. Now I'm going to explain the reason for the discrepancy here. But what happened was, Abdullah actually passed away before his son's birth. So the Prophet Muhammad is going to be raised only by his mother. So he's you could say a semi-orphan, or at that time what's called an orphan, because if you don't have a father, say that they have no one to actually earn for your livelihood. So therefore you're considered to be an orphan. So what happened is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born, and he was born without a father, because the father had passed away. Now the reason for the discrepancy in the dating, we won't get into too much detail, has to do with the way that you backtrack in the calendar. So the calendar of Christians was actually instituted much later than the Muslim calendar was. There were different calendars that were being used. So the Gregorian calendar that we use is different from the Julian calendar that was used prior. So one of the recent 20th century, you could say, scholars decided to take one of the incidents that took place in history, which was the death of the Prophet Muhammad's son, Ibrahim. And he took that incident, he took that event, and he said that there was an eclipse that took place at that time. So he took that eclipse and he backdated based upon astronomical calculations, and he came up with the date 571 CE. That's why you have this one date, and the other scholars say no, it actually corresponds closer to 570 CE. The problem, it doesn't lie in the dating of the calendar, it lies in the conversion back into the other calendar. Anyways, that's not too important, it's around this time. What's important is that after he was born, children are not named exactly when they're born. So when he was born, Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, was still alive. And his grandfather said, I'm going to take Muhammad, I'm going to take this child into my custody. So he took him in his custody, and he took him to the Kaaba, and he gave him the name Muhammad. And he named him Muhammad, which was a very, very rare name at that time. Most people would not give this kind of name. And it's very important, we'll talk about why his name is so important later on. If you look at the lineage of the Prophet, going back to Ismail, it's very important. We have at least 21 ancestors that go up to a man by the name of Adnan. So we have Muhammad, B means Ibn or Bin, which means the son of. Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, going to the Hashimites, Abdul Manaf, Qusay ibn Kilab ibn Murrah, Ka'b, Du'ay, all of these people. Okay? In my slide there's one person missing, but I think you have them on your slide. After Mudar, who do you have? You have Mad after Mudar? No, before Adnan. Huh? He's there, right? In your, okay, so you got him on your slide. Alright, so Nizar is on your slide. So you have 21 people going back. Why is it important? Because the Prophet ﷺ said himself that he came from the most noble lineage. And Allah chose these people in particular. So there's something special about his lineage. Adnan, his lineage only goes up to Adnan because he himself said that don't trust the people of, what are those people called who do lineages? Don't trust Don't trust genealogists, because oftentimes they tell lies. So we know for sure that his lineage goes back up to here. Anything beyond that, he's not sure. But everyone knows for sure that Adnan traces his lineage back to Prophet Ismail. So that's important to know as well, inshallah. So this is his background, this is his birth. Okay, let's talk about his early life. So in his early life, he was actually brought up in the desert. What happened is that he came from a very noble family. And children who come from a noble family are always raised in the desert. Now why are they raised in the desert? For a number of reasons. Number one, there's something special about the desert in terms of its environment, in terms of its fresh air. And one of the important things that they had was the language was actually preserved in the desert more than it was in the cities. Which is ironic because nowadays it's the exact opposite. You will find in villages different, lower level of language than you'll find in the cities. At that time, the pure, pristine Arabic, of which the Arabs were very proud of. In fact, the word Arab itself means someone who can express himself. Right? So they were very proud of their language. He was brought up in the desert because of that. And many nobles were up in the desert. So what happened was, during the time when the Bedouins actually come into the city of Mecca to choose a child who they're going to take, and they're going to nurse them in the desert for a few years and then return them back to their mother. All of these women came into the city. And when they came into the city, everyone began to pass by Muhammad. Why? Because they say, why would we take an orphan? One of the reasons why these women from the desert would take one of the kids from the city is because they said we can get some favors later on in life because we brought up their child. So then you have that connection. You have a tribal connection and you have a foster connection even. So this is very important in society. What happened was, since Muhammad did not have any father remaining, and he only had a grandfather at that time, no mother wanted to take him as a child. So you have Halima, one of the women as well. She said herself that I was not interested in taking this child. Who would want to take an orphan when the father is not alive, and the grandfather Abdul Muttalib, despite being the leader of the tribe and the leader of the city, he was almost on his way out. He was very old. And once he passes, where are the connections? There's no connections left. So almost everyone passed by. But since Halima was a very poor woman, and she did not have much as well, she was unable to get any other child. No noble man wanted to give their child to such a poor, such a poor family. He said, we're not going to give it to like someone like this, someone who doesn't even have much money, they don't even have many animals, how are they going to take care of my child? So what Halima decided, she said that, you know what, I feel embarrassed to be the only woman who goes back home without a child. So she decided that, you know what, I'll go ahead and take this child. I'll go ahead and take Muhammad. So this is how Muhammad actually became the foster son of Halima Sa'diyah, and he grew up in the desert at this time. As soon as he grew up, as soon as he became in her custody, and she was taking him, she says she noticed that many blessings were coming her way. Certain things which she could not experience, her animals were not giving milk, and all of a sudden they were giving milk. Her animals were moving slow, all of a sudden they were going slow. At this time it was a year of famine, so it was very, very difficult for a lot of people to actually survive out in the desert. What they realized was, as soon as she took this child, she reports herself that, you know what, my luck completely changed, and I just started getting blessings right and left. So this is a very important thing as well. What happened was, though, before that, let's just fast forward. At the age of 6, Halima had already returned Muhammad back to his mother around the age of 4 or so. At the age of 6, Amina died. The mother of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had also passed away. After she passed away, at the age of 8, now his grandfather dies. So now he needs to be taken in custody by somebody. He doesn't have a father, he doesn't have a mother, and he doesn't have a grandfather. This is very important, because if you want to think about the wisdom of why is it that Allah chose for a prophet not to have a father or a mother or a grandfather, some of the wisdoms that you'll find actually have to do with the fact that they do not want anyone to be claiming and making any type of claim, with regards to where he might have gotten this message, where he might have gotten this education. Or maybe because he came from a noble tribe that he's trying to carry on the legacy of his ancestors or his forefathers or something like that. Okay? What happened was he became entrusted to his uncle, who was Abu Talib. Now his uncle was a noble man as well. He was also a son of Abdul Muttalib, but there were many sons of Abdul Muttalib as well. So he was the brother of Abdullah, the brother of the father of the Prophet Muhammad. But he was a very poor man. He was a noble man, but a poor man. So what you find in society here, in Arabian society, is you will find wealth, one of the important factors, but nobility or lineage is a very important factor as well. So he had one of them and he didn't have the other. He did not have very much money, but he did have the nobility. He did come from a tribe. Now how do you know that he was poor? In fact, he was so poor that later on in life, one of his own children, by the name of Ali, who we'll be talking about later on, he was not able to care for him when a famine came. He was not able to support Ali. So in order to help him out, actually Muhammad took Ali into his own house, which we'll talk about later on, inshallah. When he grew up, the Prophet began to work as a shepherd. And that's very important, because every single Prophet had worked as a shepherd before him. And being a shepherd teaches you a number of things. It teaches you patience. It teaches you how to care for a group of people. It teaches you how to guide people. You have to guide your flock, you have to guide your sheep. There's a number of important lessons to be learned over here. After being a shepherd, he became a businessman. And a businessman obviously is going to be more profitable than being a shepherd. So what type of businessman was he? The type of businessman he was, sometimes he would sell things, and sometimes he would enter in a contract, what's known as mudaraba. Mudaraba is a type of contract which it's profit sharing, basically. Basically, you take your merchandise for one person and you go and you trade on their behalf, even though you do not have any investment yourself. So you go and you take their merchandise, you trade, and depending on how much you make, you keep a commission. So it's a commission-based profit sharing here. Okay? He became a businessman. And he was a very honorable, noble, and trustworthy businessman. So much so that he earned the status and the title of the name Al-Amin. And Al-Amin means the trustworthy. It means a trusted person, a person who you can put your trust in and you can give them something and you know what, you don't have to worry about it. So this was his nickname because he was so honest in his profession, which tells you something very important. It tells you that there weren't that many honest people around either. But he was one of not only the most honest, but there weren't too many honest people. And you're going to see when we talk about the Kaaba, why there weren't so many honest people. Okay? At the age of 15, some people say at the age of 20. Between 15 or 20, there was a battle that took place. An important battle that's known as the Battle of Fijar. Fijar means, you can say immorality. The forbidden battle, you can say. The reason why it's forbidden is because in Arabia, one of the other customs that they still had from the time of Prophet Ibrahim was what's known as the 4 sacred months. And 4 months out of 12, 4 months out of the year, what happened was, yes, I called your name, I know. So, out of the 4 months out of the year, what you find is, no one is allowed to participate in any war or battle. So 4 months out of the year, no one can go and raid another caravan. Even the robbers and thieves, they actually respected this. And this is very important. This is something from the time of Prophet Ibrahim. So what happened was, this battle which took place between two tribes, between the tribe of Quraysh and I believe the tribe of Qais, these two tribes got into a battle. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ participated in this battle even though he was very young, but the only thing that he actually participated in was that he was gathering the arrows for his uncles that were missing. So whatever arrows missed, he would go gather the enemy arrows and give it back to his uncles so then they would continue the war. It's important why he didn't fight in this battle. The reason why the biographers mention this is because these sacred months were sacred months going back to the time of Prophet Ibrahim a.s. So there was still religious significance despite all of the changes that had taken place. There was still significance in these sacred months. So these sacred months are still there, and in fact they're mentioned in the Quran as well. So he only gathered arrows at this place. What happened was, he was well known for his honesty, Al-Amin. What happened was a woman by the name of Khadija, who had been widowed twice already, so she was quite old. She hires him to go to Syria, which is on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. She hires him to trade on his behalf. And she's among one of the noble women, as well as one of the wealthiest women in Mecca. So she sends him to Syria, and she's obviously not stupid. She's not just going to send some guy, despite his reputation, just with all her merchandise, and then not have, he could rip her off or whatever it may be. So she sends her servant by the name of Seerah to go along with her as well, go along with him as well on the journey, to make sure everything goes smoothly, and in case anything happens, and to see what happens. When Seerah returns, when her servant returns back, he starts telling her that you can't imagine who you sent me with. You sent me with the most amazing person I've ever seen. He's not only Al-Amin, he's not only the trustworthy, he has the most amazing character. The way that he would deal with people is so absolutely amazing. And look at how much profit you got back. You see, he actually gave you all your profit and he made more money for you than anyone else has ever made for you. So not only was he honest, but his honesty didn't actually bring his money down. His honesty actually caused him to actually increase in the profits as well. So what he did was, usually his only goal was to go and trade her merchandise and simply come back and that's it, and you made the money. But instead what he did, he took her money and he reinvested it over there, bought more merchandise, came back, sold it over here, made a double profit, and instead of keeping that himself, he actually gave her all the profit back. So she was like, this is amazing, this guy's awesome, right? So she goes and she proposes to him. Now she did not propose directly, she sent her friend Nafisa, and she said, I want you to go propose on my behalf to this man. So she went ahead and proposed. And Nafisa went and told him, he said, would you be interested in marriage? And he says, I'm not sure, I'm not sure if, who would want to marry me, I'm really poor. And he was poor at that time. He would only collect a little bit of the profit, even though he would make money for other people. So he said, who would want to marry me? I'm not sure if someone would be that interested in me. He said, well, what if I could give you wealth and beauty and nobility with a good lineage? And he said, who would reject that? And he said, who are you talking about? Said, I'm talking about Khadija. And he said, well, who am I in front of Khadija? I'm nothing in front of Khadija. Why would Khadija be interested in me? He said, you say yes, and I'll take care of the rest. He said, okay, no problem, done. So that's how the proposal came in, and both of them were married, and Abu Talib actually conducted their marriage. Their dowry was a few camels, between 6 and 10 camels. So it's a quite large dowry actually. In fact, the interesting thing was, he did not even have enough money to pay for her dowry. So his uncles had to come together and gather a bunch of money just so that they could actually pay for the dowry. And of course at that time we have family support systems because the tribal system was very strong. What happened at the age of 25, Muhammad was married to Khadija, who was actually at the age of 40. And this was her third marriage. Okay? This was her third marriage. Why is this so important? Because despite the fact that yes, she may have beauty and wealth and lineage, she has been widowed twice. And this is his first marriage, and Muhammad will live with Khadija for the next 25 years without any other wife. Why is this very important? There's going to be a homework assignment on this. It's very important because, now people are going to start taking notes. It's important because if someone wants to claim that the Prophet was a womanizer, or someone wants to claim that, well, why did the Prophet have so many wives, or etc., the claims that are thrown out there, you notice that a person is in his prime when it comes to sexual urge, when it comes to all of these things, during these ages, between 20 and 40, or even up to 50. It doesn't go all the way up when you become very, very old, and all of a sudden you start taking an interest in women. So we will see his other marriages later on, inshallah. But keep this point in mind. It's a very important point. His uncles helped pay the dowry. They had 6 kids as well. Continuing. At the age of 35, another important event took place. At the age of 35, the Kaaba had been damaged because there was a lot of flooding. If you notice, the Mecca is surrounded by hills. It's like a valley in there. And the Kaaba is there in the middle. What happens is when you have a lot of rain, right, you get a flood, and you don't just get a normal flood, you get a heavy flood because the water starts coming down the mountains and it goes directly over there, directly into the structure. So what happened was the Kaaba was so damaged, it was very badly damaged from floods as well as from a fire as well that took place before. So the Quraysh decided that we need to rebuild the Kaaba. We need to make it nice and better, and we need to do this. One of the things they decided was that we're going to rebuild it, but we're only going to use money that is pure in order to build it. We can only use pure money. So what is pure money? Money that did not come from prostitution, it did not come from gambling, it did not come from interest. Because they even understood that interest and usury was even bad back then, even though they would do it. So all of these things that we have to use pure and clean money. So they decided that they're going to do that. When they started rebuilding the Kaaba, and just skipping the details, they started rebuilding the Kaaba. When they were almost finished with rebuilding it, there was one final stone to be placed. That stone is what's called the black stone. The black stone is still there. That black stone is significant and important because that was the last stone that Prophet Ibrahim placed in the building. And the last stone that he placed in the building, that's the marker of where you're supposed to start your tawaf or your circumambulation when you're going around the Kaaba from. So that's why this stone is so significant. Now, they even knew that this stone was significant because it's like a marker stone. It's not like a normal stone. So what happened was, all the tribes within Quraysh, all the clans were rebuilding the Kaaba. They all decided that we want to have the honor of placing the last stone. So one clan said, no, it should be, our family is better. Hashim said, well, we're the best, so we should be the one who has honor. Other clans said, no, it should be our honor. So what happened was they got into a fight. And they got into such a fight that they were ready for war. They were literally ready for war. So what happened was, one of the tribes came, and the tribe came with a bowl full of blood. And they took all the members of their tribe, and they dipped their hands in the bowl. And when you dip your hands in a bowl of blood, it means we're fighting till the death. Meaning it doesn't matter what happens, I will either put that stone, or I will kill you. Or I will kill you, or I will die. Someone's going to die, but I'm putting that stone in there. That's the way they were. So another tribe came, they dipped their hands as well. They said, okay, we're ready. You want it? Bring it on. We're going to be the ones who are going to put that stone into place. So then what happened was, they were deadlocked for days. This is not just like a few hours. They were literally deadlocked for days. They had no idea what to do, and they were about to get into a war. And when you get into a tribal war, you don't just get into a war with the people who are there. Your whole family, around the entire Arabia, and all your allies, they're all in a war with you. So if you declare a war on someone, then that tribe is going to come from all the outskirts of Mecca, and they're going to come and fight as well. This is going to be an all-out war. So what happened was, one of the elders from among the people there, he was a little bit intelligent. He says, look, we don't need another war. So what we're going to do, let me take my suggestion. Let us do this. The first person who comes tomorrow morning, and the first person who's on his way coming to the Kaaba, we will allow him to decide who is going to have the honor of placing the stone. Now they accepted this decision because they were people who did a lot of gambling. They were people who, when they didn't know what to do, said, oh, let's just like flip the coin. So for them, it's okay, this kind of makes sense, you know. The next guy will come, okay, he'll decide whatever. So whatever he picks, we'll go ahead and accept it. So they did that. And when they came, the next morning, the first person who's coming is who? It's Muhammad. And Muhammad comes in, and when they come in, you know, some people said yes. And you know, when you say yes, it means one thing, and when you actually mean it inside, you may say, oh, this guy who came, I'm not going to accept him. You know, so when he came, they were all happy. They said, Al-Amin, Radina, we're happy, we're content, we're very happy with his decision. Whatever he decides, we're very happy with it, because he's a respectable person. This is why this incident is so important. This incident is important because of that particular incident, that particular point. It shows you the status that Muhammad had among his people before the prophethood came to him. A very important point to note, and how that status had changed because of his message. Okay? So what happened was, his solution was, he says, okay, bring me a sheet. So they brought him a sheet, and he put the stone on the sheet, and he said, now every single clan is going to pick up one corner of the sheet, and they're going to carry it together, and every single person is going to be able to carry it. And they did that, and he went and put it in place himself. So they were all happy. He said, we all have the honor of actually putting the stone in place. Another very important point, his ability to reconcile different groups. That was something that he was given, and something that he had. And everyone was content with his solution as well. Okay? The last thing, the last important point which happened before the revelation was what's known as Hilful Fudul. Hilful Fudul is very important. It's known as a coalition to protect the weak. This is basically what happened. A man from Zabid, which is in Yemen, a man from Yemen came to Makkah for trading, and he brought us some merchandise with him. And when the merchandise he brought with him, a man by the name of Al-As ibn Wa'il took his merchandise, but he didn't pay him anything in return. So he didn't give him any money, and he just stole his goods. So the man from Yemen, he's a foreigner. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have any connections. So what am I going to do? You know, I got this is horrible. So he started approaching the clans one by one. This guy ripped me off. Can you help me? So no. Who ripped you off? Al-As ibn Wa'il? Sorry, we can't do anything for you, because he was a very honorable man. He was a man that came from a very powerful tribe. He said, sorry, we can't help you. He went to another tribe, another clan. Can you help me? Sorry, we can't help you. Not against Al-As. No, we can't do that. We don't want to mess with his family. Right? So what happened was, this man got so agitated, he said, this is ridiculous. He didn't just, I'm not going to be oppressed like this. So he jumped, he went on top of a mountain, and he began to make a cry. He started, singing poetry, and he started saying, what kind of people are you, Quraysh? What kind of people, you're supposed to be in charge of Makkah? This is supposed to be a sacred city, and then you guys do this to me and no one's going to help me? So some of the clansmen, they had some remorse, and they said, what's wrong with us? He's right. How can we not stand up for justice? So they got together and they gathered in the house of a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Jud'an, or Jad'an. They gathered in his house, and they came up with this pact. And they said, if anyone is wronged, and is not able to get justice through the tribal system or whatever it may be, we will all unite together, and we will support that man, and we will stop the oppression from taking place. So this is precisely what they did. And when they did this, they signed the contract, they signed the agreement, they went back to Al-As, and they forced him to give his merchandise back, or he has to pay for the merchandise. The reason why this is so important is because this was before Islam, and Muhammad participated in this pact as well. And he was in the house of Abdullah ibn Jud'an when this document was signed. And he said later on in life, he said, if I could go back and be a part of that coalition one more time, where if somebody called me again to participate in that type of treaty, I would answer and I would not sacrifice it for anything in this world. Why is this important with regards to his character right before the revelation? It's because it shows that not everyone, this is a house. The house of Abdullah ibn Jud'an doesn't mean that the entire city can fit into the house. Only a few of the most influential and notable people are allowed to be in that house and who are going to be there to sign that agreement. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was one of those people. So it shows you his status in the society where he actually was. Okay? And then he began with seclusion. And unfortunately that's not what we wanted to get to, but inshallah, I think we're going to stop here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding, the correct understanding of the life of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah give us the love of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And may Allah allow us to be in His presence and in His company in paradise. Ameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.